All right, welcome everyone, and thanks for joining us today for debugging in full context with FullStory and Sentry. My name is Amy, and I am your webinar host today. And today we are joined by Steve Foley from Sentry and Patrick Brandt from FullStory. But before I hand it over to them, a couple of quick housekeeping items. We are recording today, and anyone who's registered will receive the webinar recording tomorrow, and that will come directly in an email from me or from one of my teammates. I also wanted to let you know that we will have time for questions. So our expected runtime is about 20-25 minutes, aiming to keep things short and sweet because we know you have a lot to get back to. But we will have time to take questions. So if you have a question you want to ask Steve or Patrick, you can go ahead and drop that into the questions box in your GoToWebinar control panel. And okay, now before I pass things over to Steve, since you'll be seeing in real time how FullStory and Sentry are working together, I wanted to give you a quick overview of FullStory for those of you on here who are not current FullStory customers or might not be familiar with our interface. At FullStory, our mission is to tell you everything you need to know about your digital experience. So to do that, FullStory ingests and analyzes every point of user interaction with your website or application. And with all of that digital experience data, FullStory works to surface issues along with giving you a tool set and the integrations that you need to fully understand those problems, including getting to the bottom of which issues are impacting revenue, taking conversions, and creating a bad digital experience. So at a very high level, what that looks like is funnel analysis from our conversions product, which you can see here, letting you define the steps of a funnel you care about. And then FullStory analyzes all of those user interactions and bubbles up your top opportunities based on the impact to conversion. It also looks like frustration focus charts and graphs that help you find the areas of your product that are causing friction for your users. Next, we've got dev tools that augment the insights that you get from tools like Sentry. And then, of course, at the core of it all is session replay, so you can dive into the individual user experience behind a particular issue or error. So that's what we're really focused on today. So without further ado, I am going to go ahead and pass things over here to, let's see, Steve and Patrick. Take it away, Steve.
Thanks, Amy, for that overview of FullStory. I'll just to give you guys an introduction. I am Steve, who is an engineer on the ecosystem team at Sentry.
And I'm Patrick. I'm an engineer on FullStory's solutions engineering team.
Thanks, Patrick. Before we get started, for those of you who haven't used Sentry before, I'm going to give you a very high-level overview of how Sentry works. If you know how to use Sentry already, feel free to tune out for the next 2 or so minutes. At a high level, Sentry fits into a developer's workflow and tells you if your code is working as expected or not. And if it's not, it will surface all contextual information. You can easily install Sentry by adding one of our SDKs to your applications with your language's package manager and just a few lines of code. Later, I will show you an example of how to do this with JavaScript and NPM. As you can see on my screen, we support the most popular languages. Once an error occurs in your application, Sentry will alert you via Slack, PagerDuty, or whatever alerting system your team uses. Now that you're aware of an error, Sentry helps you figure out the who, what, when, where, why, and how. We do this by giving you relevant information about the error, such as the stack trace, impacted users, breadcrumbs that show exactly what happened right before the error, and more. Now that you've identified the error, you can triage it with your favorite project management tool, such as Jira. We also connect to GitHub and other source code management tools so we can identify the developer most equipped to resolve an issue with our suspect commit feature. You can automatically resolve the issue in Sentry by merging a PR that has the issue ID in a comment. All right, so for those of you who tuned out, come back. I'm going to teach you and show you about this new Sentry FullStory integration. So you can get to this integration by searching on npm. Let's do that right now. It's just search @Sentry/FullStory. Let's get it up. Cool. So this integration package will seamlessly connect your Sentry and FullStory accounts. When you look at a browser error in Sentry, you will see a link to the FullStory session replay at that exact moment in time. When you're watching a FullStory replay and your user experiences an error, you will see a link that takes you to the error in Sentry. In order to use this integration, you have to be using the Sentry browser SDK and the FullStory browser SDK. To install this package, you can use either npm or yarn. Another thing you have to do to get this integration working is adding this code snippet here. I'm going to walk you through what's going on here. So the first thing you see on line 1 is this importing Sentry from @Sentry/browser. This is basically importing this browser SDK from Sentry. And down below, you can see we're initializing it with a sentry.init. The second piece of this is importing the FullStory SDK and initializing it here. And the final thing you see is importing the Sentry FullStory from @Sentry FullStory, which is the name of this package, and adding it to the list of integrations that you see in the Sentry init. You're also going to have to replace the Sentry org ID with the organization of your slug, or the slug of your organization, and you can get this from the URL of your Sentry org. You also need to replace the FullStory org ID with the value of your org ID of FullStory. You can find this at the FullStory settings page. One last thing you have to do to get this to work properly is you actually have to go make a change in your Sentry settings. So to do this, go to Settings, then General, find the header that says Security and Privacy, and add the FullStory URL to the global safe field. This will basically ensure that whenever you have a link to FullStory, it shows up correctly. So now that I've explained how to install it, now I'll show you how this works. So the way the integration works is, as I mentioned earlier, is that you can see the URL of the FullStory replay when you're looking at a Sentry error. So once you scroll down below the breadcrumbs and other information, you'll see this little thing, or this little tag here that says FullStory URL, and you'll see a URL that takes you to FullStory. So if you click that, you'll go to the session replay in FullStory. When you're watching the session replay, you'll actually see an event in the sidebar that says Sentry error. You can see an example right here. So you can just copy this URL into your browser and you'll get to that error in Sentry. Cool. So now that I've explained how this integration works, I'm going to show you a demo app that we use to basically show off, what this integration can do. So I'm going to pull up this React shop that Patrick made, and Patrick's going to walk through, what's going on here. So Patrick, can you explain?
Sure. Yes, thank you, Steve. So this is a faux e-commerce app that I built. And on this e-commerce app, you can see that we're selling different varieties of fruit and some cocktail mix and beans, everything, Steve, that you need to put together a really engaging party tonight. Anyway, so you've added a few things to your cart. You can then go to the next step of the purchase flow, which is to view your cart. And from here, you can see that you're able to edit your cart. You can continue to check out. And that's basically it. So, keep in mind, this is not a real e-commerce site. It's something we put together for the sake of demonstration. Also, for the sake of demonstration, we've seeded this sample app with a couple of errors, so that we can dive into how Sentry and FullStory work together.
All right, thanks, Patrick. So if you remember earlier, I was describing how you can connect Sentry to your Slack, channels. So here's an example of an alert that came in from Sentry. So we have a new error, a new issue, and we're going to open this in Sentry. So if you have not used Sentry before, I'm going to give you a kind of a high-level overview of what's going on this page. So at the very top, you can kind of see that it says the error and the message NAN. Keep scrolling down. You can see things like the URL the user was on when this happened. One of the more important things that you'll see when you use Sentry is the stack trace. So right here basically shows what's the line of code that generated this error. So you see right here, we're throwing this error NAN. Keep scrolling down and we can see the breadcrumbs. As I mentioned earlier, the breadcrumbs are basically all the things that happened to the user right before the error occurred. So we get things like button clicks, network requests, and then finally we get to the error itself. Keep scrolling down, we get some information about the user, such as the IP address. If the user was logged in, you would see an email address here. Keep scrolling down, and we finally get to the FullStory URL. So as I mentioned earlier, this is the URL of the session replay in FullStory. So let's open this up. Great. All right, Patrick, do you want to explain what's going on this page?
Sure. So that deep link that you just clicked from Sentry is actually taking you to the moment in time immediately preceding the error being thrown in FullStory. So if you see, if you look at the bottom part of the screen, you see there's some playback controls, and we're somewhere near the middle because that's where the deep link is linking to. That's where the error occurred. And if you look over there on that event stream on the right, you'll see that we've got some errors, and then we have our Sentry error. This is the connection between FullStory and Sentry. And as you said earlier, Steve, when you were walking through the installation instructions, from here you have the ability to link out of FullStory and back into Sentry. Now, common use case here is that often engineers or developers are not quite sure how users got to a particular error state. So if you would like, you can actually go back in time a little bit. So click back seconds at 7 seconds. And then let's just watch what this user was doing. We're going to watch what they were doing before the error occurred, and then we're going to watch what happened after the error occurred. This will give us a sense for how impactful this issue was to the user experience. So it looks like the Sentry error occurred when the user emptied out their cart, but it didn't really impact their experience at all. They're just going about the business, continuing to add things to their cart and removing them. So it didn't look like it had any appreciable user impact, this particular error.
Yeah, I'd agree with you, Patrick. That doesn't look so bad. I don't think it's very critical, but you know what? It's never good to have errors in your application. So let's, maybe we don't need to fix this right now, but let's not forget about this. So I'm going to go back to the URL in Sentry, and I'm going to go make a GitHub issue out of this. So we're going to link this. Let's make it an issue, and I'm going to assign it to you. So
all right, I'll take care of it.
I'm going to press create issue, and bam. Now if we want, we can actually go to the issue in GitHub, and you can take a look what it looks like. So, I didn't have to type anything out, and you already see, the link to the issue and the stack trace, which will help you figure out, how to actually resolve this. Cool. So, like I said, this is a really minor issue, but sometimes errors are actually a little bit more severe. All right, looks like we got another Slack alert for a new error. This one says billing address street 2 is required. Let's go take a look at this one in Sentry. All right. Cool. So rather than spending time on this error page, let's go just look at the error or the replay in FullStory, so we understand, how important this is or how bad this is. Hey Patrick, do you know what's going on here? I see these gray diagonal lines. When I looked at the form earlier, it didn't look like this.
Yes. So you're looking at our privacy controls in action. So our customers have the option of blocking any information that they don't want to be recorded from being sent to our servers. So in this case, the owners of React Shop have decided that they don't want to record billing information or credit card information, payment information. And so they've blocked those things from being recorded on their site, which means they don't leave the user's browsers, which means we don't get them. And in replay, when that's happened, when our customers have blocked information, this is what it looks like. So you get this kind of redacted block over anything that's been blocked.
Cool, that makes sense.
All right. So I think, in true find the bug and fix the bug fashion, Steve, I think we should go ahead and try to understand what the user was doing before they got here, and then let's see what they did after. Let's really try to gauge the impact of this issue.
All right, I'm gonna go press back a couple. All right, let's press play. Let's see what
things to it.
All right. add some things to the cart. Cool. Press and checkout. Press and checkout a few times.
Trying to pay, trying to get their products, trying to get their fruit. So this looks like a pretty critical error. It seems like we've got a bug on checkout, and our user here can't proceed to the checkout flow and actually purchase their products.
Yeah, I see they click checkout a bunch of times, and you can see for every time they click the checkout button, we get a different Sentry error. That's not good. Let's go back to Sentry and let's see if we can figure out what's going on here a little bit more in detail. All right, so now we're back in Sentry. Let's go to the right sidebar. This has some really useful information. The main thing you can get here is basically, when did the errors happen? You can see two graphs here, one for the last 24 hours and one for the last 30 days. And then you actually see a first scene and a last scene. So you can see here, the first scene is just 3 minutes ago, and it's tied to this release here. And the last scene is about the same with the same release, which is interesting. So let's open up this release, see what's going on here. Make sure I have the right project selected. Cool. All right, nice. So if you look here for this release, it kind of has an overview of what's going on. We have the new issues in this release. So if I click here, we see this issue we're just looking at, 10 events. We can also see the commits here. That's interesting that this commit, and in fact, if we go back to the issue, you can see that Sentry is able to detect there's some suspect commits here. Like, let's look at this one for breaking the site. Hey,
Yeah.
Patrick, why are you trying to break the site here? This is
I don't,
like all our money comes through this checkout flow.
yeah, sorry, this is my first time coding. I didn't know that what would happen.
You don't code production very often, so I get it. It happens. Okay, well, yeah, so this, if you look at this release, it looks pretty bad. So, we have this new issue. We're losing money every second this is live. Let's go roll this back. I think we gotta undo this release. So I'm gonna post an engineering channel that we need to roll the release back. All right. So hopefully someone can jump on and roll this back.
You know what? I'll take this, Steve. I feel like I'm at least partially responsible for this.
I think you did have, your name is definitely on this commit, and it looks really suspicious.
Oh, worked on my box. All right, so I just pushed the fix to GitHub, and now I'm going to do a deployment. Doing deployment now and creating the release in Sentry.
Cool. Yeah, let's go. Let's take a look actually at releases. Let's go. Oh, I see you actually just made this new release. That's good.
Yeah, it should be live now.
All right, so now let's do some old-fashioned manual QA and see if we can, replicate what the user did and make sure that things work as expected. So make sure I get the latest site. So if I remember correctly, the user was adding a couple things to their cart. They went to their cart, then they press checkout. Let's go fill out this form. I can put my name in here, some credit card number, expiration date. Let's see if this works. Awesome. Nice. It looks like this one is expected.
All right. We're going to have a party tonight, Steve.
Yes, we will, now that we've fixed the site that we broke earlier. So let's go back to our release page. Cool. So if you go back, we see this release does not have any errors associated with it, which is good. So I feel pretty confident that our site is working well right now.
Awesome.
Cool. So, anytime you have a production outage like this, whenever you have a post-mortem, you want to understand what's the impact of, the outage. Is it how many users got impacted? That's one of the most critical questions you'll ask yourself. So, my understanding is that FullStory can help you figure this out. Is that right, Patrick?
That's right. So if you go back to one of the issues and then click on one of the deep links into a session. Now from here, you can click back, and this takes you to our search interface. So as part of our integration, we've been indexing Sentry errors anytime an error occurred. So go ahead and search for Sentry error, Steve. You can start to filter that type ahead box. There you go. So now this will show us all of the users that experienced an error. And if you want to see specifically those that experienced the checkout error, you can filter even further. Yep, and now you can filter on messages and find those that, where the billing address 32 is required. And there you go. So now we know whom among our user base was the most impacted by this issue. And we can go and check out what their experience was like.
Cool, yeah, I can open this link and watch it if I wanted to. Well, that's great. Anyways, I think that wraps it all up. So, everyone who's listening, thanks a lot. It was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed this, and Patrick, I'm assuming you did as well.
I did. Thank you so much, Steve, and thanks everyone for tuning in.
All right, take care.
All right, thanks, guys. I am relieved to know that customers will not run into any more problems purchasing their fruit online. So now we can jump into questions. If you haven't already and you have a question about FullStory or Sentry or the FullStory and Sentry integration, go ahead and drop that in the questions tab or box in your GoToWebinar side panel, and we'll start with a few that I have here. So Steve, you might be able to answer this one. Why can't I find the FullStory integration on the integrations page in Sentry?
Great question. So we have this integrations page if you've ever gone to use Sentry before, and we list a bunch of integrations, but as you mentioned, FullStory isn't on there. The reason for this is because you can't, or as you saw in the webinar, you can't actually just install this with a button click like a lot of the other integrations. That being said, we are working on fixing that, and it's going to be on the integrations page within a matter of a few weeks.
Awesome. And then another question about the integration specifically. I've installed the integration, but sometimes when I go to the link in the Sentry error in FullStory, it says that the event doesn't exist. What is happening in that case?
Yeah, so unfortunately, there's some limitations with this integration. Basically, the way this works is that in the browser, when your user experiences an error, it creates an error ID. And when it sends the error to Sentry, it passes along this error ID. And then normally, under normal circumstances, Sentry accepts the error, puts into a database, and so when you go to the link, you can load the error. However, not every error that is generated on the client actually will make it to Sentry's servers. There's a lot of reasons this could happen, but one of the most common reasons is if it's on a mobile, a mobile application, and let's say you lose connectivity for a few moments, that error that you generate is actually not going to reach Sentry. So when you try to click on the link that we have in FullStory, it won't go anywhere. So if you see this error or this issue happening on on client devices, especially mobile, just know that this can happen.
Okay, good to know. Patrick, one for you. What about bugs or issues that don't result in an error? What options do engineers have in that case?
Sure, because we all know that sometimes there are things that impact user experience that won't always throw an explicit error from the browser. But we've got a couple of metrics, a suite of metrics that we call frustration events in FullStory. So these are things like rage clicks, where a user is desperately trying to get a button to do something on a website, but it's just not working. So they're going to click it repeatedly in an effort to express their frustration. There are also dead clicks, the idea that someone clicks somewhere on a page, but there's no action related to that. So, we record DOM mutations and network calls and things like that. So we're assuming that if someone clicks on a thing and there's no change whatsoever, that is a dead click, and that was, an unintentional behavior. And then also another fun one is cursor thrash, where folks, just start waving their mouse cursor around and because they're so angry at the website. So these are things that we distill, that we pull together as part of our search interface. When Steve was going through our demo together, and he started searching for Sentry errors, you could also search for for rage clicks and dead clicks and mix those with other combinations of data. We also have a report card on the slowest rendering pages, and that's according to the average time to first contentful paint for every page. So you can imagine, you know, latency and slowness and lagginess is one of those silent errors, basically. And so folks in FullStory can dive into one of these sessions that are, you know, tied up to a slow rendering page, and then, you know, use our tools to figure out, you know, where the bottleneck is. You know, you mentioned dev tools, Amy. We have some robust data gathering and collection going on. You know, we record the request time and response time, basically potentially the latency for every single network request, and we display that back in a waterfall graph. So there's a lot of data available for folks to understand, you know, outside of an error being thrown in the site, you know, something breaking, where can user experience issues or latency issues start to get in the way of a user experience.
Got it. Another question here, Steve, this one's for you. Did I see that you guys have the ability to link to multiple GitHub issues in your Sentry issues interface?
I'm glad someone picked up on that. So unfortunately, this is actually a tough question. So the reason why you might have saw like 2 different GitHub icons, because we actually had this our account linked up to 2 different GitHubs. I think one was Patrick's and one was mine. So I actually think you can, yeah, you can have links to multiple different GitHub issues if they are on basically a different installation. And so that's like a different user. So if you just have one installation of GitHub that's like just like your account, then you can only have one link at a time.
Okay, got it. Thanks. Okay, so I think that will do it for today. Thank you guys so much for taking the time to join us. Again, you'll get an email from me either later today or first thing tomorrow with a link to the webinar recording. Yeah, if you have any questions that come up between now and then, you're welcome to reply to my email and ask those, and we'll make sure they get answered. And that's it. Thank you guys so much for your time today, and we'll see you soon. Bye.
Bye.